and teaching and collaborative learning in the digital age. Her most recent books are Doing Qualitative Research Online, What Kind of Researcher Are You? Reframing and Rethinking Collaboration in Higher Education and Beyond, a practical guide for doctoral students and early career researchers with Narelle Lemon, Publishing from Your Doctoral Research, Create and Use a Publication Strategy with Helen Kara, Learning to Collaborate, Collaborating to Learn, Find the Theory in Your Research, and Getting Data Online. The title of her presentation is Rigor and Online Qualitative Research: The Qualitative E-Research Framework. Let's welcome our keynote speaker, Janet Salmons, PhD.
Hello everyone, I'm Janet Salmons and I'm happy to talk with you today about achieving rigor in your online qualitative research using the Qualitative E-Research Framework. So I'm joining you from Boulder, Colorado, and send my greetings to all of you and look forward to communicating with you at another time when perhaps we can see each other. So online qualitative research offers some real advantages. We have the ability to engage participants we might not be able to reach otherwise. And in times like the ones we're in right now, it's one of the best ways that we can find out about the lived experience, even when we can't be together face to face. But when you start to think about online research, a lot of times people think, well, that has to do with, say, the way that I'm collecting data, or perhaps the use of technology as a part of data analysis. But in fact, technology influences every aspect of the design when we're conducting it online. So that's why I present it as a circle, because I think we need to take a systems thinking, holistic kind of approach and look at the influences of technology at each stage of the research design throughout the process of conducting the research. And then once we're reporting on and writing about the research, to think through whether all of the pertinent questions have been adequately addressed. So let's just look at a few of those today. As you can see in this framework, we begin from the start place where we think about the purpose for the study and the questions, and I'll look at whether we've made the right choices so that the design really fits with the study. And then all of the other elements of a research design, taking a position, choosing methods, choosing the technology, the sampling, ethics, collecting the data, analyzing and reporting on the data, and the findings. Of course, we can't get to all of these today, but let's look at a few of them. So, the big picture that any reviewer will want to explore when they're trying to evaluate your research will be whether the whole thing makes sense. And while all researchers need to consider these questions of alignment and making sure that the key parts of the study fit together, the methods and methodologies, epistemologies and theories, those will be looked at probably with a greater scrutiny when the study is being conducted online. So we need to do real due diligence about those decisions and be very explicit about the choices we've made. And the ethics piece, which of course has a lot more involved than simply thinking about consent agreements, but that will be one of the questions that will probably be, kind of at the heart of any inquiry. So, how you are interacting with any participants, or how you are using materials that you have found online, those kinds of issues, must be very clearly and explicitly addressed. And We don't have time to go into all of those here today, but I do cover them in detail throughout my books. So I hope that those will be useful to you as you're exploring these questions. So, another part of the purpose is considering the purpose for the technology within the study. So here in this diagram, I tried to outline kind of three main ways I see people using information and communication technologies, or ICTs, in a study. So the first is where it is simply a medium. So here we can't be face-to-face, we have to communicate electronically. So we're choosing a tool to do that. The question that we'll have here is whether the participants can access and have the digital literacy needed to use those technologies and feel comfortable using them. So then in the next stage for this setting, here we're choosing a platform, maybe because it has particular capabilities. We want to, for example, be able to see a participant. So we're going to choose a platform that has those features, or perhaps we want to be able to share our screens. We want to be able to interact, using written materials. So we're going to choose the platform that will fit. So here, the platform takes a little bit more precedence than it would if the technology is simply the medium. And here we, on one hand, need to answer questions about whether that setting is appropriate given the study. And we also have to understand we're making some trade-offs, because there may be some people who don't have access to that kind of platform, or the ability, digital literacy skills to use it. So, those are decisions that we have to make. And then at the third level, this would be where the technology is part of the phenomenon. So, we're not simply using it as a way to communicate or a place to communicate. We're actually interested in the tool itself. So here, we want to know, how do students access a digital library? How do parents use the internet for, to find, support during problem times? Here, we're not simply trying to communicate with them online. We want to know how they're using it. Are they using it, from a computer, from a mobile device? We're interested in the technology itself. So your study might include more than one of these options, but kind of understanding that it can play a variety of roles will help you to explain that in a way that will be both understandable and make sense to your reader. So here, now we move into kind of a next stage of questions to say, well, based on some of those points about the purpose of the study, and whether or not we want to interact with participants, we can choose the appropriate methods. So here I've outlined them in three categories. The first is extant. So this would include any kind of study that does not involve direct interaction with participants. So we're reading posts, archives, using documents, databases, etc. We may be online in the same place where people are communicating about this topic, but we do not ask them any questions or provide any kind of prompts, because if we do that, we've now bumped down into the next category, which is elicited. So here I'm describing any kind of study that involves asking people questions in some form. So interviews, questionnaires, participant observation. Here, we we are interacting with one or more participants. But in looking at the literature and looking at the ways that people are doing research online, I felt that we needed yet another category. And so I'm calling that enacted research. Some might call it performative research. And here, there's not only interaction, but often collaboration and ongoing relationships. It could be longitudinal, or at the very least, probably multiple interactions with participants. And here you would have action research, arts-based, creative, games, simulations, and things like that. So, the critical point here is that when we are using extant data, we may or may not need informed consent, but we may need other kinds of permissions to use the materials, to access even the archive. We may need to make some kind of agreement. And, in some cases, we might need to solicit informed consent because of the materials that are posted, could identify the individuals. Then with the other styles that I mentioned, there's no question involved. We will need to negotiate consent, and we will see that we have an interaction with participants, and we need to protect their privacy and minimize any kind of risks to them. Another question in the framework is about your position. And I think this is another area where people who are trying to evaluate the rigor of a study, will look at, very carefully, because they want to make sure that you do not have biases or conflict of interest that would jeopardize the quality of the research. So here, I've put this on a continuum, and you'll see in my work, I use a lot of continua because, rarely are things, absolutely black and white. We always have some kinds of shades of gray, it seems like. So using a continuum helps us to think about, where we might fall. So, with, as an outsider, where, we've described the purpose of the study in terms of, say, a gap in the literature, a scholarly problem, a theoretical problem that we've found, and now we want to study. So we are, we are not, inside, we're outside. On the other end of the continuum, we have, the ultimate insider, where the researcher is actually one of the actors in the case. They are one of the participants. It could be that there's an autoethnographic element of the study, or that, in some way the researcher is contributing data to the study. But somewhere in between, the researcher might share characteristics of the participants, or they might have experienced the problem they now want to study. And, some degree of insider status can be very helpful in an online study, because, it may help us to gain access to an online community, to have credibility with a gatekeeper to some, kind of setting, or, to collaborate with someone who will help us to recruit participants remotely, which is, challenging to do. So it's not a matter of one is right or wrong. They're just different, but you need to be transparent about where you stand. And if you are an insider, then, explain that, in a way that will be understandable to your reader. So another question is, well, now, given all the things we've already discussed, what type of data do you want to collect? Online, we have many options. And again, one is not right or wrong. It's just, what best fits your study. So here we have, visual data, images, video, or artwork, maps, all kinds of pictures of all kinds. So here, you can already think that, some of those pictures might reveal the identity of the participant. So if you're going to use those kinds of images, explaining how you're protecting the identity of the participants will be essential. Similarly, with the next category of oral data. And here, we have not only the spoken words, someone's response to an interview question, but also music, environmental sounds, all kinds of different, noises or cultural contexts that may have an oral component. And then text, the written word. And as we know, all of these are used extensively when we communicate online. So, then, we need to think about what kind of technology is going to be appropriate to collect that type of data. Are we going to, interact with a technology that is primarily text-based? Because that might be more accessible to people who don't have high-speed internet connections or webcams. And, if we want to collect images, we can send them back and forth. But that, would probably not be your primary use of the tool. So, if we want to collect those more visual types of data, we might want to choose another kind of platform. So, here you can see already that we're moving from that medium question to the setting question. Not only what is the technology, what kind of data can we collect, but also what's the role of that technology in the study. So here I've kind of separated out the video call, which might be just a straight video communication where we can see the participant and talk back and forth, and a multi-channel meeting space where we can do other kinds of things, where we might be able to share screens, do shared applications, and have multiple types of data collected, within the same research event. And then, the final one might be virtual reality, or could be games, or, other kinds of simulation types of software. So then, once we've decided on the software and the role it's going to play in the study, then we need to think about how we are interacting with the participants. So once again, you have many choices. One is not right or wrong. What fits your study and the nature of the participants in the setting they might be in? Are they going to be at home? Are they going to be at work? Are they going to be in a community setting? Do they have the ability to respond immediately to your question, or will they need some time to think about it? Or is there an advantage to giving them some time to think about it? So here you might see a couple of familiar terms and a couple of unfamiliar terms. So, I guess in the early days of the internet would think, well, you're either synchronous, you're either online at the same time, or you're not. It's asynchronous. But I've added in two more because I think with today's technologies, we have, to look at it in a little finer way. So, at the one end of the continuum, I have synchronicity, which would be where, we are not only using a platform that permits us to be online at the same time, but this is the only thing we are doing. So, if I am online with you and you can see me, you know that I'm not doing something else. I'm not updating my social media page, or making dinner, or talking with somebody else in my family. I am solely focused on the exchange with you as a researcher. If that is something that is important to you, because you want to kind of assess the timing of response in terms of the need to reflect on a question, the kind of signals that are given when someone needs to pause, but perhaps that's not important to you, or it's not possible given the nature of the study and your population, in which case we say, well, it's going to be a synchronous exchange, and we just acknowledge that there may be other things going on at the same time. And whichever one of those you want to use, you need to be able to communicate that to the participants in advance when you're recruiting them, when you're setting up the interview or the focus group or whatever the interaction may be, and make those expectations very clear. And that's also something that you would want to describe in your design. So again, the person who is reviewing your study will think that the way that you've described it fits with the purpose of your research. At the other end of the spectrum, we have two options. So with the near synchronous, this would be, say, think about a text chat or even a social media or online community group where the other person is not online right this minute, but they're going to be soon. So it's kind of an elongated conversation. You expect a response fairly quickly, but maybe not right this second. This can be, very helpful if you're trying to kind of ask a participant for, their reactions to, different, situations over a period of time, or you're acknowledging that your participant has, a difficult schedule and may not be available for a synchronous conversation. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have asynchronous. So here we really want our participant to give some thought to the questions before they answer. We don't want that off the top of the head immediate response. We want them to take the time to really consider, or maybe even do some reading or some research or some other kind of activity before they respond. So explaining what kind of response you are looking for will go a long way to kind of verifying to your reader that you've chosen the appropriate technology and methods for your study. So there's at least a few questions that you can ask yourself when you're designing your study and preparing to conduct a study, or when you are reviewing your own proposal or perhaps someone else's proposal to understand whether they have done the best job they could with their online research. So I hope that you'll keep in touch. I'm sorry that we can't be in conversation in real time right now, but I would be happy to answer your questions if you can send them to me. And then there's some resources available here for you that might be useful from MethodSpace. So we have, a fairly extensive collection around online research topics.
Yes, we are happy to listen to the presentation of Dr. Janet. And so we encourage you to post your questions here in the Q&A box, and we are going to collect them and send to her, and we will post in our AQRA FB page. Now we have done, an interview with her for the question and answer. And now I would like to request Joy to show the video. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Janet, for your presentation. We would say that the topic that you just presented is really very relevant to us here at the Asian region, and of course, I believe other parts of the world as well. And we are very interested to know more uh, than what you have just presented. So thank you so much for agreeing to this question and answer portion. Uh, I like that idea, that theme that you mentioned, that when we do research online, usually some of us understand that, okay, because I gathered my data online, that is already conducting research online. But you are saying that it is more than that. Doing research online is not only doing your data collection online. Would you like to explain
Right.
some more, elaborate on
Right.
that concept?
Well, I think, you know, what in particular, I'll talk about research involving human participants. So, you know, certainly collecting extant data and using archives and documents. You know, there's a lot of material available to researchers for all or part of their research, but, you know, where it gets much more tricky is in interacting with participants. And as I mentioned in my presentation and introducing my circular framework, that, you know, each choice that we make influences every other part of the research design. And so, you know, there's just a lot of decisions that as a researcher we need to make. And it's not a matter of one being right or wrong. I mean, certainly there are inappropriate things you could do, but you know, that's not, you know, my concern here. It's more that, you know, we think through the choices and how each of those choices influences the other part of the design. So, you know, for example, I mean, right now, you know, we're having an online interview here. And, you know, we chose this kind of platform because we wanted to be able to see each other. So, you know, then if that's a choice that we make, then we have to acknowledge that, you know, some people don't have access to this kind of platform, or they don't have webcams, or they don't have high-speed internet access. And so we need to acknowledge that, you know, when we're going to choose this platform, it's not to say don't do it, but we need to be clear about, you know, kind of what that means and what our expectations are. And then, you know, then beyond that, to think about, well, I mean, is it okay if I turn my webcam off? Do you want to see the participant? Then that's something that you need to spell out when you're doing the, so this is why when we talk about informed consent, people kind of fixate on the consent part, but there, for online researcher, we need to focus on the informed part, because, you know, we need to make it clear what it is we want. So if you want to be able to see me, then you need to say, you know, do you have a webcam? Can you use a webcam? Are you comfortable using a webcam? And I would like you to leave the webcam on through the entire interview, if that's okay with you. If you need to take a pause, please just tell me, because otherwise the person turns off the webcam and you're like, well, now what? You know, where'd they go? And then we need to also think about, well, you know, do we want to be able to see other things? You know, do we want to be, I mean, you think like, say, in a face-to-face environment, we choose a setting to do research. So we might say, well, are we going to do the interviews, you know, in my office, you know, in an institutional, you know, setting, in a neutral setting, like maybe a library or a conference room, or are we going to do the interview in the person's environment, in their home or their office or their community? we think about that partly because we want to observe something about that setting, or else we want to create a very neutral setting where, where there's not those distractions. But, if you were interviewing me, let's say, we're doing research about something to do with families, do you want to see my home? Do you want to see what my environment is like? Do you want to be able to look and see, what are the books on my bookshelves, and what, what are the pictures on my wall? I mean, do you want to see where I am? If so, then you need to make it clear. I would appreciate it. Is it okay with you if you don't put on a virtual background, because I want to be able to get a sense of what, what your home is like. Is that okay with you? So there are all these kind of little things that say, if we were in a face-to-face environment, we would need to make some decision about the setting. But those decisions are a bit different, when we are thinking about doing it online. I mean, on one hand, I love doing interviews in a technology like we're on, because, we also have the ability to do shared screens. So we might be asking someone, well, show me how you post on social media, or, show me, pictures, or we can do, the kind of photo elicitation or video elicitation. We can do all kinds of visual interactive methods, and the dialogue is the closest, I think, to a natural conversation. Whereas if we're thinking about, say I am doing research with people who don't have access, all they've got, they could text chat, but that's it. They don't have enough bandwidth to do this kind of thing. Then, I in my writings, you'll see a lot of things that have a continuum, because it's not black or white. There's sort of shades, and we need to think through it. But as we think about the kinds of decisions that we normally would make as an interview researcher about the degree of structure. So am I going to ask the same questions to everyone in the same sequence, and with varied follow-ups, or or am I going to do unstructured? Am I going to just say, tell me about your life, or what was it like when you grew up? Tell me about your grandparents. These kind of very, or open-ended things that could go like any possible direction. Well, if you're doing that in text chat, does not work very well, because you don't want to have the type of questioning where you expect the person to be sitting there typing, or like, kind of madly trying to, enter in a very long response to some complicated question. So, if we're trying to use that kind of technology, then I encourage people to really like write down your questions and then look at how you can break them down. So how can you take a big question and break that down into a bunch of little short questions so that you can keep the dialogue going back and forth? Because, one of the biggest challenges in online research, face-to-face research, and in ethical research, we say the participant is voluntary, and they can discontinue their participation at any time. That's important. But let's face it, if you're in an interview face-to-face, it takes a lot of guts to just get up and walk out of the room. You might say, I don't like where this is going. This is making me uncomfortable. This is too sensitive for me. I can't talk about this. And then as a researcher, you could say, well, let's step back and talk about something else. Online, all they've got to do is click the little X in the corner, and boom, they're gone. They've disappeared. So, and especially if you're trying to do something like a text-based interview where, they're in the, they've answered a couple of those long questions and they're like, I don't have time for this. Whereas if you've got something to go back and forth, but that's something that you have to plan, it's very hard to do that, spontaneously on the fly. Whereas if you've got your questions written out, you can just cut and paste your questions and just keep the flow, going very quickly. So, you could see just from those two examples, you would collect very different kinds of data from, one where you are in some ways potentially, quite immersed, in, the person's setting, whatever that may be, the home, office, community, whatever, where you can see, you can see if there are other people in it, you can kind of get a sense of what they're versus, something that is writing only and somewhat more structured. So, so all of those things, so you can see how that ties into, well, your population and your sampling, what level of digital literacy you can expect. Now, before the COVID pandemic, I think I'm like kind of a meta researcher. I do research about research. So I'm always talking with people to try to find out, what kinds of approaches people are experimenting with and what they're doing. And, I talked with several researchers who got around that digital literacy barrier and that access barrier by partnering with, let's say, it might be they're doing health research and they partner with the clinic. And so then the person comes into the office, here's the computer, it's all set up. You don't have to know how to do, much of anything, you're just going to sit there and talk to the researcher, the technology's there. But now, or at a community center or senior citizen center, or, those kinds of facilities that would have the technology and somebody who could help the participant, get access to the tools. But, with COVID, those restrictions, would not be, very easy to get around at this point. So, so then, we have to think, well, what are the implications of my choices? And then just one more around that choice would be, is it okay with me if I have different kinds of interviews with the different participants? So might I say, what matters to me is to talk with, this number of people in, who are going to talk about this type of lived experience that relates to my research problem. And, I may end up with, this person had text chat, this person I wrote to with email and had email back and forth, and this person I did it in a video conferencing platform, and I've got video and audio and all of this stuff. Is that okay? And for some people, they might say that's worth it to me because I want to use whatever technology the person has, because it's the most important to me to have that diversity of participants. Whereas for someone else, they might say, that will be a nightmare for data analysis. I don't want to do that. I'm just going to, pick one and stick with it.
In which of these approaches would you recommend? I like what you mentioned about one researcher may say, okay, I'm fine with having data. For example, you have 10 participants, 2 you did like this, virtual face-to-face, and then there's a virtual room tour, okay? But maybe with 5, you only did text, and then maybe with the 3 others, you did audio. And then you say, okay, I'll put all these data together and I'll analyze, and this is, okay, my whole set of data, and I'll analyze this one. And maybe the other will say, oh no, with my 10 participants, I want that all these 10 should be like virtual face-to-face. What is your advice? Can we claim the first researcher who gathered data in different modalities, can that researcher claim like validity that still he or she was able to capture the reality even through different modalities?
Right. I think, I mean, it's mainly it's problematic for the researcher. I mean, it's more work for the researcher to analyze that data, but it could be, for example, if I have 10 interviews that are all using the kind of technology we're in now, and using things like we're doing some photo elicitation. I'm going to show you, 5 pictures of where I live, we can share the screen, or I'm going to do a share, we can, do all of those kinds of things. Then when I'm analyzing that, I might not transcribe the interview, because I might do my coding and my analysis directly from the video, where I'm watching the video and I'm taking notes and I'm coding things, from the video. And, a lot of the data analysis platforms now allow you to do that. Whereas if I had a situation where I've got 5 video interviews and 5 of things, other kinds that are mainly text, or maybe I have audio, video, and text, then I would probably say transcribe those video and audio interviews. So then I would end up with all text. You see what I mean? So
Yes.
I think it's more around the issue of the population that you want to talk with. And I mean, I work with in some of the different kinds of things that I do, working with people in different parts of Africa and in places where, even within the United States where I live, where, people don't have access to high-speed internet, and they might only have a phone, that might be all they've got. But, the question is really, is it important for you to include those people? Now, I think that, especially with the pandemic, people have become, it's become kind of a joke, about people's, Zoom fatigue. But for researchers, it's like, hey, this is great, because more people have figured out, how to use these tools. And, this is one of the questions that I ask, like, well, what kinds of tools do people use, in their everyday life? What do they use, when they're communicating with their family, or when they're communicating at work, and that sort of thing, so that they're comfortable with it, and the tool itself does not become an obstacle where they're feeling stressed out about, trying to, run it, and that's what they're thinking about. They're not thinking about their experience, with whatever it was you're trying to ask them about. One of the exercises I invite people to do in the first chapter of my book is to, just reflect on your own use. And, like say, just like over a couple of days, just, kind of keep a journal, like, and then think through why you made those decisions. So maybe, you text messaged with somebody, and you did this kind of video conferencing with somebody, and somebody else who sent an email, and somebody else who posted something in a forum. Why did you do it that way? And to just really think through, the nature of that type of communication, and think about, how that fits or doesn't fit with your research. I mean, because each has its advantages and disadvantages. Again, it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's just a matter of really thinking it through. Whereas, I think it's more, especially for people who are new to this, think like, oh, well, I'll do my interviews on Skype, or, but they're not thinking, well, that, just making that decision opens up a whole nother set of decisions that you need to think through. And that when you do think those through and are able to articulate your rationale, then, the people who are reviewing your proposal, whether you're, a student trying to get your committee to buy in, or whether you are somebody who's trying to get, funding, if you can explain why, what those choices were and why you made them, the person who's reading it, who is not very familiar with online research, will be, I think, more favorably disposed. I mean, it's certainly, it's a I think that it is one of the challenges that we have, that, you know, not, you know, in many cases, the people who are doing that kind of review, you know, really do not understand the implications. And, you know, I've encountered situations where things that I would think like, oh no, like, don't do that. That's like bad, you know, where they'd be thinking, you know, looks good to me, because they don't, you know, they don't get, you know, what those, you know, what the pitfalls are, you know, for what's been described, you know, or else, you know, on the other end of it, where they'll just be like, oh no, forget it. Now, I certainly think that there's less of that going on now, because, you know, people don't have the option of doing it face to face, so they've got to think of something else. And you know, I still think that, you know, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, there's a great deal of material, you know, more and more available all the time, in terms of historical documents and contemporary documents, and, you know, all different kinds of archives and repositories, and of course, you know, social media posts and all those kinds of things, where there's, you know, lots of material that doesn't, you know, require you to interact with people. But, you know, probably just because I'm a people person, I enjoy being able to hear from people, and to be able to ask those follow-up questions. I'll just add one more thing. I've talked about kind of interviews as a one-on-one. You know, it may be that people would want to do group interviews or focus groups. And I think, you know, the same principles apply to, you know, that you would use in any kind of focus group. But I mean, you can do a focus group. I've conducted focus groups in a video conferencing like this. The main suggestion that I would have would be to make your group substantially smaller than what you might think would be workable in a face-to-face environment, just because you need to have, you know, time for each person to speak, and you need to have, I mean, you really need that facilitation and some agreement about, you know, how are you going to call on people, and how are people going to, you know, are you going to use a text chat in addition to the video conferencing
In your
gain
experience, what is the ideal number for online focus group?
I would say 5.
Okay, and then you said that can be
it would be better to do, it would be
like
better
text.
to run, it would be better to run multiple smaller groups than to try to have, you know, much more than that in the online.
Okay, thank you. I want to highlight what you said, that we can do what we do, provided we rationalize what we are doing. And for researchers, I think that is a very important part. And you also emphasized the need to accommodate marginalized groups. You mentioned about some people may not have this one, may not have this, you know, like may not have the, I mean, like now we are having this virtual face-to-face. They may not have this kind of modality, but yet we want to be inclusive, right? And I think our decision to include others who may not have this kind of access to these modalities, this speaks about our philosophical orientation. Yeah, so I think this explains what you said, that it's not just, okay, I did interview through Skype, I did now this is research online. I like that emphasis, because I think that is something that we understand, that doing research online is a whole range of activities, of thinking about what we are doing. Lastly, may I ask you, like, actually these are like 2 questions. What are the advantages of doing research online, and what are also the limitations?
Okay, yeah, I know we're running out of time, so I'll just say very quickly, I think, I mean, in a warmer way than you can do online, is something we miss. And then I think, the observation piece, sort of the participant observation element that is a part of a lot of interview research, we just don't get that. Now, for example, I mean, one of the people I spoke with about her research on that involved issues of abuse. Well, she's like, well, I don't know whether, the abusive husband could be in the room. I can't see him. I can only see what's on the camera. So, so there are some, it's, it's not perfect for every kind of situation. However, I think, especially in our time and with the greater access to online communications and the, more kind of comfort that people have because it's so much more a part of people's everyday life. We have, many options that, we can use. So,
In
well, I know
doing,
that
okay, actually we cut short that conversation. It's already 6 o'clock in our timepiece here. I just would like to encourage you to, if you want to have access to the books of Dr. Janet Salmons, we are going to put the link. So she sent to us the link so you can get a discounted price. And by the way, Dr. Janet Salmons was the one who first reached to us. She heard our name from somebody and she arranged a conversation with us, Dr. Safari and myself. And in method space, and this is the online arm of Sage Publications, they're doing analytics, and she said they found out a very strange phenomenon, and that is that they discovered lately that there's a spike, a very high spike of readership and involvement in method space of people coming from Asia, specifically the Philippines. So when she heard about us and she learned that we're in Asia and in the Philippines, she had this Skype with us and she asked us, tell me what is happening in Asia. Why is this so sudden? We didn't have this kind of number of readership. Now it's so a sudden increase in readership. And we said like, actually, we don't know, but this is what we are doing. We have this AQRA, we're doing the virtual events, and she got very excited about that. So if some of you here are accessing the materials of method space, she's very happy about that, and we support that, we encourage you, and we are happy that you are availing yourselves of these materials. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our first day of the 6th AQRA conference. I now turn over the time to Dr. Graysel.